Xi and Putin met, and evidently they negotiated something ahead of time, which was embarrassing for Putin. Putin had to say in public to Xi, I know you have questions and concerns about the war, and we will try to explain our position again. That was humiliating for Putin.
Russia has pounded its neighbor with a fresh missile barrage hitting more energy installations and other civilian buildings. And that's less than 2 days after one of its heaviest bombardments yet. 7 people died when a missile hit their apartment block in Vilnyansk near the southern city of Zaporizhia. That's according to the Ukrainian presidency. A gas production plant in the east and a missile factory in Dnipro were amongst the latest targets according to officials. Many people are suffering serious power cuts. President Zelensky accused Russia of destroying his people's supplies of electricity and heat, but Moscow has looked to justify its recent strikes by accusing Kiev of unwillingness to negotiate. Well, let's talk to William Courtney, former special assistant to the president for Russia, Ukraine and Eurasia, and former US ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia. William, hello and good evening to you.
Yes, hello.
Hi. Let's first of all, what is Moscow up to, justifying or trying to justify these latest bombardments and blaming Kiev, saying, well, we wouldn't be doing this if you were willing to negotiate?
Well, the Russians have been losing on the battlefield. The attacks on energy infrastructure, if you will, are a second-best approach on Moscow's standpoint, because these are not really military targets, so they're wasting their precision-guided missiles, of which they don't have too many, on targets that are not militarily important to them. They seem to think that the Ukrainians will lose their enthusiasm for opposing Moscow's aggression because of the attacks on energy infrastructure, cold apartments, things like that. But the opposite is taking place. Moscow would do better to reflect on what happened in England in the V1, V2 attacks in World War II, where it just fired up the British rather than cause them to lose support for pursuing Hitler's aggression.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the toll thus far in terms of infrastructure, let alone lives, William. I'm just looking at the quote from the spokesperson for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov. And so he's saying the unwillingness of the Ukrainian side to settle the problem, to start negotiations, its refusal to seek common ground. This is the full quote, William. Refusal to seek common ground, this is their consequence. What common ground could he mean?
There is no common ground at the moment. Often negotiations in the middle of a war will begin when both sides have fought to exhaustion. That's not the situation now. Ukraine is eager to fight because it's winning on the battlefield, and Russia hasn't yet understood that it's most likely going to lose the war.
Indeed, but what do you think when it comes to the defenses that the Ukrainians have been able to mount? Because apparently they managed to intercept about 75% of the missiles that came in on Tuesday. Is it a case of the US and the NATO allies giving them even more of that kind of defensive weaponry, or indeed scaling up and giving them more long-range missiles? Because I see some people have been saying, right, at this point, this is what you're going to do.
So it is remarkable, actually, that Ukraine has been able to knock down 3/4 or even more of the Russian missiles that have been striking Ukraine. The allies, U.S. allies, are planning to ship more air defense missiles. The U.S. is shipping one now called NASAMS, which has a longer range than the Stinger heat-seeking missiles that the Ukrainians have had since the beginning of the war. Those are missiles that U.S. supplied to Afghan insurgents in the 1980s.
And when you consider the billions and billions of dollars that the U.S. under President Biden have contributed to the defense of Ukraine, and now we've got the House finally flipped, so the Republicans will be in charge come January, and some of them are very, very wary and some indeed hostile to further support, military support for Ukraine. Do you think that this support could be in danger?
Well, I think in part because the red wave did not turn out to happen, that there are going to be fewer isolationist Republicans in the House than perhaps some people had thought earlier. But still, the large majority of Republicans and large majority of Democrats are in favor of continuing to support Ukraine, because Ukraine really is not only defending itself, but this is a war in which it's defending the West, the ideals of the West. This has become a proxy war between the West and Russia, as well as a war between Russia and Ukraine. The West wants to deter Russia from continuing further aggression against other of its neighbors or countries elsewhere. And so Ukraine has turned out to be the place where stopping Russian aggression is the most important factor. There have been two interesting meetings involving Xi Jinping. One was a few weeks ago in Samarkand, where Xi and Putin met, and evidently they negotiated something ahead of time, which was embarrassing for Putin. Putin had to say in public to Xi, "I know you have questions and concerns about the war, and we will try to explain our position again." And now, this latest meeting, in both Biden's meeting and then just a little bit earlier, Olaf Scholz from Germany, his meeting with Xi Jinping, in both cases, Xi made it clear that he opposed the nuclear option in Ukraine. So that's another clear warning to Russia not to go nuclear. And since Xi has been talking about that, we haven't seen the Russians make threats about using nuclear weapons.
William, do you think we are, I don't want to use the term game glibly, but are we in the end game here of this conflict?
It's too soon to tell.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill said something about the beginning of the end. It's just too soon to tell about things like that. Yeah. Making predictions is a fool's errand.
Sure, understood. William, thank you very much. William Courtney, former Special Assistant to the US President for Russia, Ukraine and Eurasia.